Welcome into the DNVR Rockies Podcast, presented by Strava Craft Coffee. Remember to use that promo code DNVR20 for 20% off your first purchase of that CBD-infused, deliciously rich Strava Craft Coffee. Drew Goodman is our guest today, as Drew Kreisman has an off day. We're skipping his day of the rotation. We're going with Drew Goodman. How you doing today, buddy?
Going with the four-man rotation this week, huh?
We're going a little short, but that's okay. I know you just had a fantastic Drew Goodman podcast that dropped this morning where you chatted with Steve Foster, and he illuminated a couple real good things.
Yeah, it was, I thought it was an appropriate time to have Steve. He's always such an upbeat guy, but I mean, after all, I know you guys have been talking quite a bit about it. The first element of spring training is pitchers and catchers, right? Well, as odd as it is to say, and as you and Drew well know, the strength of this team right now on paper is their starting rotation. So it was great to get, as you heard, a thumbnail sketch on a lot of guys and some of the new guys and some of the young guys that hopefully at some point in time will impact the roster, maybe this year or certainly not too far into the future.
Yeah, not to give too many things away, but I loved his scouting report on Rockies pitchers, including a lot of the young guys that were just added to the 40-man roster. I like what he had to say about Flint Wallace, the new coordinator of pitching for the organization. And I thought, again, it was a really good start to this spring and this conversation that, the Rockies are going to be a little bit better than I think most realize.
Well, it's always a time of year where everyone is optimistic. And we understand that from a prognostication standpoint, nobody has the Rockies anywhere near contending. So whatever they are able to do and utilize that as fuel and motivation, that's a good thing. And I also think genuinely, Patrick, and I bet you're getting this sense also, in listening to guys who play, not jack-offs like you and me, but guys who actually play and guys that coach, beyond the normal rhetoric of, hey, we got a lot of optimism and we feel we're better than people say. Genuinely, I think they believe that. The players believe that they have a lot more talent than maybe some of the journalists, if you will, and some of the experts are suggesting. And listen, it all comes down to my favorite line is Bill Parcells. We've talked about it on your show before. You are what the record says you are. So when they go play, their first 100 games, if they're 40-60, guess what? They're 40-60. But if they're 51-49, a lot of people are going to be surprised. So we'll see. You have to go play the games.
Yeah, we know where the bar is set for them, and I think that's the ongoing theme is there's a chip on their shoulder that they're going to be much better than where the bar is set for them. And, that bodes well going forward. Again, 4th, 5th, NL West, whatever it may be, this is a roster that's young enough where maybe in the next year or two, I'm not going to say they're going to be the Padres in a couple of years, but the Padres were in 2018, 2019, the team that people were kind of whispering and saying, if a few things go right with these young players, they can be a contender. And here we are now sitting in 2021. Padres are, the face of the game right now, threatening the Dodgers for best in the National League. So there's a lot of young guys on this roster that are saying, okay, we might be a couple years away, but this is going to be the start. We're going to be better than where the bar is going to be set.
To be fair, I understand why the bar is set there, because If you compare the Rockies roster, certainly to the Dodgers or the Padres, nobody in their right mind is not going to take the Dodgers or Padres roster, right? I mean, That's a no-brainer. But we also know that so many of the predictions are based on what guys have done in the recent past, as opposed to, there's projections that go on with young players, but it's usually the more heralded players. And maybe an analogy would be to Oakland, because a lot of years you go, who are those guys out there? Yet they win more than they lose. And I don't know if that's going to happen for the Rockies. We have our fingers crossed, right? But I just get the sense to a man among the veteran guys, the Stories and the Blackmans, whose opinions I'm really going to to listen to and I think carry weight. They believe they're a whole lot better than the rest of the baseball world believes.
Yeah, and going back to the starting pitching, the one thing I loved listening to was hearing Steve Foster go into detail about Antonio Senzatella. He had a fantastic year last year, really kind of broke out of his shell, was still really good, but had his issues, went back down to the minors in 2019 for a spell. But Fosty outlined a reason why, Senz is going to continue to trend upward and do something that no Rockies pitcher has ever done. I won't spoil it. You got to listen to the Drew Goodman podcast to find out about that. But I thought that was incredibly illuminating about Senzatella.
I've said this before, and I've probably said this with you, Patrick, and Drew. That is, there are a number of teams, not all teams, obviously, but there are a number of teams that would trade their rotation gladly for the Rockies' rotation, especially the first four. I think we kind of assume and hope that Austin Gomber, who they got from the Cardinals, slides into that fifth spot. But when you talk about German Marquez, when you talk about Kyle Freeland, Antonio Senzatella, who you were just referencing, and John Gray, who's healthy. We've talked about John Gray quite a bit. That's a pretty good group of four. Not going to supplant the Dodgers' top four. I understand that. Might not top the top four on paper with the Padres, but it's four that if you're in the other dugout, they have your attention. If those are the four that open the series, that one would assume they're going to pitch against the Dodgers April 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The Dodgers aren't looking at those guys saying, "Oh boy, let's have a fight at the bat rack." Those are guys that can give you an uncomfortable afternoon.
You mentioned John Gray. Foster also talked about, Gray rebounding, and coming back. It looks like so far in the early reports and spring training down in Scottsdale is that his fastball is back a little bit. He had dropped a couple miles per hour last year. Couldn't really pinpoint what that was about. Where that come from. A slider also had lost some velo on it, and it appears like he's back up to 96, 97, sitting around there somewhat comfortably. And that I think that also bodes well for the Rockies' chance and of doing much better than expected.
And the other thing that I came away from that interview with Steve this week on the podcast, Patrick, was that, and tell me if you would agree with this, how you felt about it listening to the interview, that the Rockies are going to have more depth, especially not they're going to have probably a little better depth in the rotation. And when I say that, I'm not talking about 1 through 5. I'm talking about, okay, guys get nicked, and hopefully nobody gets seriously hurt. But, 6, 7, 8, even 9, it's what the Dodgers always, they just keep rolling out somebody else with nasty stuff. And the other area is bullpen arms. It's like, okay, there's more bullpen arms that have legitimate stuff. And the depth appears better for the Rockies than it's been in a while. Was that one of the things that you drew from listening to Steve Foster?
Undoubtedly, the rotation in that 5 spot, they're going to be okay. And I mean, let's face it, 1 through 4, they're fantastic. But are those guys going to be able to stay healthy, especially after maxing out at maybe 80 innings last year? It was obviously a shortened season, so their arms aren't maybe what they've been in seasons past. So they're going to have to tap into that depth. But yeah, Gomber is going to get the first crack at the 5th spot in the rotation. We'll see what happens with that. Castellani was there for much of the year in 2020. Derek Rodriguez and Chichi Gonzalez are back on non-roster deals, so they can go down in Albuquerque and kind of bide their time in case something happens. And then, maybe the best one of the bunch that we hope to see at some point is Ryan Rolison, a left-hander that's incredibly young, first-round pick in 2018 at Ole Miss. So he could be the most exciting one of the bunch. So they're absolutely going to be okay in the rotation.
And they have a guy that you'll have to listen to the podcast. You're not going to see him in 2021. You may not see him in 2022, but at some point you're going to see him, fingers crossed. And he has a chance at being an upper echelon starter. The guy I'm referencing is a young guy. But it's exciting when you can talk about a prospect as opposed to, he looks to be a back end of the rotation guy. That's what we project him right now. This is a guy that projects to the top of a rotation if things play out nicely. So there's more there. There's more there because there's been years where the Rockies have been really, really lean from a pitching depth standpoint.
And the bullpen is incredibly good. I was on a call a few weeks ago with Rocky Mountain Sabre, and I rattled off a name of all the guys in the bullpen, and I still forgot 2 or 3 because they've got that much depth. And they've got an exciting guy that they selected in the Rule 5 draft, Jordan Sheffield, that he's actually going to have to really fight for a spot in that bullpen because there are so many quality candidates. They might not be an Aroldis Chapman in that bullpen. Not a lights out closer. We know how good Scott Ober can be when healthy, but overall, from top to bottom, there are guys there that, again, you talk about other teams maybe wanting to switch places with the Rockies rotation 1 through 4. I think the Rockies have a couple guys that I think a lot of other MLB teams could look and say, this guy could fit in really nicely in the 7th to 8th inning for us. They've got about 6 or 7 of those guys you could say that about.
And more so, as we well know, more so than any other team in baseball, they need to have pitching depth and bullpen depth as opposed to, 3 or 4 guys getting 70-plus appearances. If you can lower that number, and you know who your go-to guys are. You hope Scott Oberg it stays healthy and is one of those guys. Daniel Bard, certainly Michael Gibbons, who came from Baltimore. But you want to be able to lessen the load on those guys. See Estevez bounce back, Jairo Diaz bounce back, and Tyler Kinley, who has really good stuff, and we saw him very good at times last year. He has an option left, so he's going to be in a battle to make the club. But at some point, whether it's initially or 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season, he is going to be part of the mix down there. So there are more arms. Robert Stevenson, a former number 1, comes over from Cincinnati. It's a big arm, and you mentioned Jordan Sheffield. We saw Justice Sheffield shut down the Rockies. His brother with Seattle last year. Good pedigree, man. Good pedigree. So, fingers are crossed. There are candidates that have the ability to miss bats in that bullpen, and we'll see how it plays out. But there are more options right now than there have been in a few years.
And we haven't even mentioned Daniel Bard, NL Comeback Player of the Year last year. Yency Almonte, who looked brilliant in flashes last year. And a guy, Michael Gibbons, who I think will rebound really nicely. He was a late addition last year at the trade deadline from the Baltimore Orioles and never really could kind of gain his traction. But he's been around a while. He's, after Daniel Bard, he's the second oldest guy in that bullpen, right alongside Scott Oberg. So he's a veteran guy in a free agent year too. So he obviously wants to do really well. So you've got all those guys. It's a fantastic mix of relievers that they've got this season to rely on.
Yeah, I would never suggest that players don't try as hard when they're in the middle of a contract, but there is a sense of urgency when players are going into their walk year, their free agency, and sometimes that urgency helps produce really good years. So we'll see how that plays out for a guy like Michael Gibbons. And there's a number of guys in that situation. John Gray, is going into free agency from a starting rotation standpoint. So again, they're on paper. There's more candidates that can help you in their bullpen specifically than there's been in a while.
And I don't really think we know. This is a great question. Who's going to be the Swiss Army knife? Who's going to be like the Chris Russin? Maybe the Chad Bettis, if you will, kind of going back and forth if they need a spot start and a reliever. They've got a few guys. Stevenson, he was a starting pitcher in the minors, and when he first came up with Cincinnati, I don't necessarily see him in that role. Sheffield is a candidate for that. I think it'll really be a lot about need. Once the bullpen kind of gets settled and, this is the 6th, 7th, guy and with Bart as the closer, kind of the odd man out. We'll just have to figure out, because again, all these guys, all these relievers, they're former starting pitchers. No one, other than Houston Street, as far as I can remember, how many guys were career relief pitchers? It just doesn't happen. So they'll have to figure it out, and I think just about any one of those could be real sufficient as the Swiss Army knife.
Well, to quote Buddy Black, who says this a number of times throughout the year, particularly when he's assessing his team early in the season, he says, we will need all of them at some point. It's not just used to be the 25-man roster, but the 26 guys that break camp. I mean, you're going to need the entire 40-man roster, and probably there'll be moves where guys come off the roster and move onto the roster. You're going to need well over 40 guys to complete a major league season, even if you are top shelf in talent like the Dodgers or the Padres or typically the Yankees. You need a multitude of guys that don't necessarily break with the club at the beginning of April.
Yeah, it's the 26-man roster and now a 5-man taxi squad going around. So it takes a village here at Salt River Fields, and it takes you to be comfortable to go back to the doctor's office. But why do that when you can use Zoom Care? Never sit in a doctor's office again. If you hate going to the doctor, like the rest of us, let's face it, check out Zoom Care. The one thing that we can take away from the pandemic is the ability to do more things from the comfort of your own home. Nobody likes to sit in the doctor's office or even go to the doctor for that matter, but we all need to take care of ourselves. So zoomcare.com will allow you to do just that. You'll see, hear, and chat with a doctor just like at a traditional office visit. Get secure access to urgent, primary, and specialist care, including your mental health. Even better, this is covered by most private insurers, usually with a copay. So visit zoomcare.com today to get it started. And here we are, February 25th, 3 days away from the first spring training game. That's nice. That's going to be exciting to think about on Sunday. So March is right around the corner, but it doesn't mean the madness of college basketball hasn't already begun. DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is giving all new players an easy chance to cash $100. How easy is this, C-Note? Bet $1. That's it, $1 for new customers on any team to hit a three-pointer in any basketball game this weekend. And if your team makes it rain from downtown, you cash $100. And if you need any more reason to lock in this W, I'll tell you that Alabama, University of Toledo, Baylor, and Iowa, they all average over 10 three-pointers per game. Oral Roberts and VMI lead Division I basketball with over 11 per game. Feel better now? Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use promo code DNVR to get your shot to turn $1 into $100 when you bet on any team to hit a three-pointer in any basketball game this week. That's promo code DNVR for new customers to get a shot at 100-1 odds on any basketball game to hit a three-point shot. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older. Colorado only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. Winning paid out in $425 free bets. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. Goody, I know you've been following the Nuggets pretty hardcore lately, haven't you?
I've been following my Nuggets and Avalanche on a nightly basis. I never miss a minute of Avalanche games. I try to follow the Nuggets pretty closely as well. I want to say one thing before we talk a little bit about that. You did something there a moment ago, Patrick, that I've never heard before in my professional career. You had VMI in the same breath with college basketball. Now, I'm not suggesting they haven't played college basketball before, but I've never heard them say, hey, VMI is atop some sort of college basketball list, and you found one. They shoot a lot of threes and make a lot of threes, evidently.
But hey, what about Oral Roberts? Don't discount them. Come on, my scouting.
No, listen, I've had ORU over the years. In fact, they had a coach back in the day by the name of Ken Trickle, and they had two guards that played in the NBA, Greg Sutton and Haywood Workman. And those guys, whoever had the basketball when they crossed the timeline, fired it. So they shot a ton of threes, and they've had their moments in college basketball. So ORU's had their moments. I've never heard VMI mentioned in terms of college basketball excellence. Not trying to take a shot at future members of our military, but that was a first.
I aim to break new ground all over the place, so I'm definitely glad to see that. Do you think we're going to be getting some people over at Ball Arena? Are we going to get fans in there at some point? I getting close. A lot of other places have been limited to 1,500, 2,000. But is it going to finally happen?
I hope so. And it's funny. If you put, say, 2,500 people in Ball Arena and looked at it, you'd say, well, it's fairly empty, but it would feel great. I'm sure it would feel great from a player standpoint. Even watching on TV where they can have a cutaway and some actual fans, getting excited, it would be awesome. And hopefully we're not too far away from that. I hope the Rockies are able to have, a semblance of a crowd on opening day against the Dodgers. Certainly it won't be what we're accustomed to, but anybody is more than what we saw last year. So that would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's why I'm following that story so closely, because it's like the first domino. I mean, the Rockies, they could be the first. Again, an outdoor venue, a much larger facility, so that could happen. But it certainly would make it all the more easier if they could get fans into Ball Arena. Yeah,
no question. And as you know, I did the Nuggets for 10 years and always followed them closely, and they've had some tremendous players through the year. Guy was just in town recently, and Carmelo Anthony, and go back to Alex English and Antonio McDyess, Dikembe Mutombo. I'm not so sure, David Thompson way back, but I'm not so sure when it's all said and done, Patrick, and I think you know where I'm going here, that Nikola Jokic will not be looked upon as maybe, he has a chance, it's not out there yet, but he has a chance to me, maybe the greatest Nugget ever. And I hadn't really been thinking about that before, but I'm looking, I talked about him on my podcast that came out today, and he's among the league leaders. You talk about a guy that fills up the stat sheet. You name the category, he's among the league leaders. Pretty remarkable.
He'd be a 5-tool baseball player. Yeah, he's on that trajectory.
Yeah, he's a 5-tool baseball player. Like a 7-tool basketball player.
Well, if we're talking 5-tool players on the Rockies, a guy who certainly comes closest when I think about that, and when I think about position battles in camp, because we're getting there now. Guys are battling, and that's one of the nice things I think about this. There being so many uncertainties on this team is that it's going to be fun seeing guys try to play for that starting role, because there aren't as many certainties as in years past. And Sam Hilliard is one of those guys who's going to be battling for a spot in center field. Do you think he might be the odds-on favorite? It's hard. I feel it's either him or Garrett Hampson, but Jonathan Daza is in that mix as well.
There's more upside. This is not a knock on Daza. Daza has a great reputation defensively. He's hit at Albuquerque. A lot of people hit at Albuquerque. We understand that. Hilliard's upside and Hampson's upside offensively, one would think, is higher than Jonathan Daza. It's going to be a good competition. You really wish, and we've talked about this on your show. I was a purist, but now I'm a DH guy. I still hope that they can come together and produce a DH for 2021. That would help the Rockies a lot, because if they go into the season without a DH, you're talking about Tapia, you're talking about Hampson or Hilliard, which is what we're discussing, and Charlie and Wright. And the most desirable thing would be one of those guys is a DH, and you can rotate it. It would allow Charlie, who's in his mid-30s, to DH probably more frequently than anybody else, perhaps. But you now have a C.J. Cron in the mix. We know how good Josh Fuentes is defensively at first base. So now you have Cron, a right-handed DH guy that that's done it in the past. Charlie, again, get his legs, or get him off his legs, if you will, more frequently. So you really do wish they had that. Otherwise, it is going to be a heck of a battle. And then you have a tough decision, Patrick, if you're Jeff Bridich, if you're Buddy Black, in that, do you want Sam Hilliard getting, 10, 12 at-bats a week? Or do you say, well, listen, we have options on him. Let him go get, 30 at-bats every week down in Albuquerque. That's a tough call because for me, he's already, he's already on the Dean's list at Albuquerque, right? Garrett Hampson's already on the Dean's list at Albuquerque. Now it's about making that transition to becoming a Dean's list major league player. But you got to – sometimes there's not enough at-bats to go around.
I know it sounds strange. I think some Rockies fans, confuse this a little bit because we're acknowledging the fact that, the Rockies are going to lose their fair share of games this year and then some. But in a way, they've got more guys than positions or spots in the lineup that they need because they've got so many young, unproven guys that still kind of have that upside and still have that potential that, you can only fit so many of them in the outfield. And you brought up first base, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Josh Fuentes, it seems like, has been pushed out a little bit now. Buddy even mentioned that, Fuentes could spend some time in left field. And so maybe Tapia is now getting some at-bats in center field. So, they're going to have a lot of opportunities to mix and match, I think, all around the diamond. And whoever's producing is going to get the bulk of the playing time.
Listen, in the past, Patrick, if your name, and this is an obvious one, if your name's Trevor Story, if your name's Nolan Arenado, if your name's Charlie Blackmon, you need not walk into the clubhouse and go look, where's the lineup card to see if you're in it. They know they're in it, and they pretty much knew where they were going to hit on a nightly basis. Trevor Story, when he walks into the clubhouse in 2021, doesn't look at the lineup card. That's not changed. Charlie, unless he was told the night before, hey, we're going to give you a day tomorrow, Charlie knows he doesn't have to look in the lineup card. With virtually everyone else, they're going to have to look to see if they're in the lineup card. I know Tapia had a nice 60 games last year, and we hope he grows, but he's not a lock to play just because he had a nice 60-game stretch last year. I mean, you could see, Hampson and Hilliard and Blackmon in the outfield, or Tapia, Hampson, and Hilliard in the outfield. Or maybe, as you said, because Fuentes is right-handed, got a tough lefty on the mound, maybe it's Fuentes, Hampson, and Charlie in the outfield on a given day with Crone, a right-handed bat, at first base. So there are definitely, some options. And, I'm kind of stream of consciousness here and thinking out loud. But outside of the aforementioned obvious ones, Story and Charlie, and probably even to a lesser degree, McMahon, you got to walk in that clubhouse and check the lineup card. And also, I'm in it, but where am I playing? Maybe Hampson's at second base. And, Brendan Rodgers, we hope he, is the second baseman, because for the Rockies to grow, they need Brendan Rodgers to realize his talent that made him the third pick in the draft. But I think 6 out of 8 position players are going to have to check the lineup on a daily basis.
Yeah, you're walking back and forth from your locker to check the lineup, to go back to your locker to make sure you got the right mitt. Like, all right, I'm in the outfield today. Got it. And you know what? They need that kind of flexibility. It's something that they've been preaching in the organization, for several years. I remember going down to Albuquerque and talking with Glenn Allen Hill about exactly that. Giving these players opportunities to play all around the diamond. It's, when the Dodgers really started, doing some things, and they found Chris Taylor out of nowhere. He can play center field. He can play shortstop, second base. Max Muncy was doing it for a while before he held down the fort at first base. Now the Rockies have some of those guys that can play around and play some competent defense. And now it's just a matter of them to go out and do it for 162 games this year. So, the organization knows what building blocks they have going forward.
I'm glad you mentioned a few guys there with the Dodgers. When we think of the Dodgers, we think they're great. They've won 8 straight division titles. They're defending world champions. They're a threat to win 100+ games, it seems like, every year. And you tip your cap to those guys. You have to. Even if you don't like them, you have to. But so much pessimism right now surrounding the Rockies. And I get it, man. It's understandable. Arguably their best player, guy on the Hall of Fame trajectory, is now in St. Louis. We understand that. But you mentioned three guys for the Dodgers that if I mentioned their name 4 or 5 years ago, you wouldn't, but most people would say, well, who's that guy? Who's that guy? And Chris Taylor, who was kind of a journeyman with Seattle. One guy you didn't, or maybe you mentioned
Kike Hernandez. Yeah. Didn't mention him, but we were both thinking it. Yeah.
Right. And then Max Muncy, who I thought last year could be an MVP candidate. When you walk around that diamond with the Dodgers, you go, okay, if things fall right, Bellinger had already won an MVP. Mookie Betts, we know, is an MVP. But, if things fell right in a given year, Max Muncy, talent-wise, because he could hit 35, 40 homers and 35, 40 doubles, he could be an MVP-type player. Nobody had ever heard of him unless you were a baseball nerd like us 4 or 5 years ago. So three of the most important Dodgers in the last 3 or 4 years are guys that, people would have dismissed a handful of years ago. So can the Rockies be fortunate enough to, a year from now, people are going, wow, that guy, Sam Hilliard, where did he come from again? He was a pitcher more or less at Wichita State, or that Garrett Hampson guy, he's an exciting player. Where did he come from? If the Rockies can get a couple of those stories, they can accelerate this process of rebuilding to where they were in 2018.
Yeah, Kriesman called them. He trademarked the Lost Boys, and they've got plenty of them. And if even only half of them play out to the way the organization expects, you're right. They're going to be fantastic. Now first base: C.J. Cron, Greg Bird, Josh Fuentes. I think to a lesser extent, Connor Joe. He's gonna. We'll see him over there at spring. Is it a foregone conclusion that this is probably C.J. Cron's job to lose?
I think on paper you would make him the leader in the clubhouse, at least from my standpoint. Greg Bird would be a great story. Grandview High product. He had some tremendous moments with the Yankees a few years ago. But I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, it's already, how time flies, right? I think it was like 2015 when he made a name for himself in New York, and he was hitting home runs, and it looked like he was on his way to being a big-time Yankee. And he's dealt with so many injuries since then. Cron's kind of been steady. It's almost as if somebody's always looking for a sexier guy than C.J. Cron, but then you look at his numbers, his OPS, and his ability to hit the ball over the wall, and you say, this guy's a big leaguer, man. And so I would agree with you. I would say right now, C.J. Cron. And Josh Fuentes has versatility. I could see, ball games where Cron plays 6-7 innings. The Rockies are up 4-2, 5-3. You know where I'm going with this. And Josh Fuentes is in the game defensively for the final 6 outs.
Yeah, they'll be able to mix and match, really nicely. It's funny you're talking about Bird coming up with the Yankees in 2015, and it made me think back to all those guys that, were kind of a flash in a pan. Kevin Maas, you remember him?
Absolutely.
You go, oh, he's going to be the next best thing. Shane Spencer went out and did it. And, Greg Bird hitting those 11 home runs as a rookie. And he just hasn't been able to get healthy. But this, I think, is a good place for him to kind of settle in. It would be a fantastic story. Colorado kid alongside Kyle Freeland. We've got Max George in camp as well. Making the conversion to catcher. So those are just some of the great stories that, again, for anyone that might have turned the Rockies off at a certain point last year when they fell out of it, you missed out all the enjoyment of Daniel Bard as the NL Comeback Player of the Year. And, Greg Bird could be the next version of that, this great story for the organization that everybody can rally behind.
It's one of the fun things about sport in general and baseball in particular, because the pace of the game allows us to tell stories. Baseball provides a lot of opportunity because, as we were discussing earlier, it's not just the 26 guys that'll break camp at the conclusion of spring training. It goes well beyond that. And, Daniel Bard was not only the best story, I think, in baseball last year, as you suggest, but one of the best stories we've seen in baseball the last half dozen years. And, if Greg Bird were to return home and play a role this year, that would be a wonderful story that I know you'll enjoy telling, and Kriesman will enjoy telling, and I'll enjoy telling.
Bart, I think he said the other day in camp, because this is the time where all those quotes are coming out. We're finding out how guys did in the off season. Bart put on 12 pounds of muscle. So, I mean, last year wasn't this flash in the pan. Hey, man, that was a great ride. I won last trip. No, he's still looking to do the thing, and he's set to be closer again. And paired with Oberg, I mean, get to the 8th inning, and the Rockies are going to win a lot more ball games than people think.
Well, Patrick, think about this from Daniel Bart's standpoint. Correct me if I'm wrong, he's 35 or 36 now.
I want to say 35.
I think he's 35 as well. So Daniel Bard missed 7 years. So it's not like, well, he's been in the big leagues for a dozen years, and I mean, he's got a lot of unfinished business. I mean, there was a huge void in there where he's with Boston, and he's going to be the next closer, and he's going to be one of the top setup guys or closers in baseball for a number of years, and it all went away because, as we know, it's been well chronicled, his issues with throwing the baseball near the plate, and now it's all back. I mean, the funny thing is, when he comes out there, I don't worry about a walk. His stuff is nasty, and he throws strikes. And he probably says, I want to keep doing this for a while. I lost 7 years. I lost my quote-unquote age prime, but I'm going to show people here in my mid to late 30s that I'm going to do what I was supposed to be doing in my mid to late 20s.
With pitchers, they talk about having only so many bullets in the gun, and man, he saved his. So he's his arm's a lot more fresher than people realize. It's similar with Jacob deGrom, where he was a guy, his innings were limited at Stetson University, and it's one of the reasons why, although he got a late jump on his career, people have really kind of praised him, and it's one of the reasons Mets locked him up long term, not because he's a perennial Cy Young candidate, but because he seems like a sure thing to be a guy that is just not going to have those arm injuries. Minimizing the amount of innings pitched can be really helpful for an older pitcher's career.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of it. And I don't know the rhyme or reason behind it. You can break down deliveries, and you can break down mechanics and say, oh, this guy's going to blow out. This guy's putting too much stress on his elbow or his shoulder. And some guys eventually do, and other guys don't. And, hopefully, Daniel Bard has great health, and knock on wood, collectively, everybody listening in. And the Rockies, group in their rotation have been effective, but been able to take the ball every 5th day by and large over the last few years. I know John Gray dealt with some shoulder stuff last year, but that has been, a tough and intact group from a health standpoint. And that, it's unusual. It's unusual in baseball with pitchers. We know that.
Well, if we're talking about pitchers and delivery, well, we're talking about Hassel Cattle Company, because they have got the damn good beef. The best source for farm-to-table Wagyu beef in the country is Hassel Cattle Company, a 4th-generation cattle farm out of Texas. The Hassel Cattle Company ships some bodacious beef all over the beautiful U.S. of A. straight to your door. Why is it called the blue-collar Wagyu? Simple. It's the best damn Wagyu that every person can afford. Head to HassellCattleCompany.com. That's HASSELL cattlecompany.com, and use promo DNVR10 for 10% off your order. And be warned, I want to tell you this. Kreisman and I, we've been tipping you off about this plenty of times. They are going to offer you some free items, new specials, and discounts along the way. So be prepared for that. They're hard to pass up. So it's DNVR10 for 10% off, and orders over $200 receive free shipping. What more could you want right now? Following a snowstorm when roads are questionable at this time of the year, pack out your fridge and freezer. Save yourself the trouble of what should have been a simple trip to the grocery store. HassellCattleCompany.com, and we promise you won't be disappointed. You're also going to enjoy saving some money, or making some money, I should say, with MSU Denver Online. Time and time again, the one thing that will protect you against economic downturns is an education, allowing you to adapt into varying 21st century careers. At MSU Denver Online, Go and build your toolbox for tomorrow. Because in these uncertain times, make money and work while furthering your education. You no longer have to decide between earning a degree and living your life. MSU Denver Online is the Colorado institution providing both rigorous and affordable online programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom, the online classroom, which they've been doing for years, long before many have had to figure it out on the fly. Best part, MSU Denver graduates use their relevant degrees to land coveted jobs. In fact, some of us here at DNVR are already signed up to take MSU Denver online classes this summer after having done so already last year. So don't waste your time and money on stuff that isn't relevant to the subject you're studying. That's why MSU Denver Online is the way to go. Visit msudenver.edu today for your chance at a better tomorrow.
Go Roadrunners.
Bud Black's favorite team. We know this.
Didn't Buddy break out a Roadrunners cap last year?
Oh, he did. That was like his most cherished possession that he had gotten that entire summer camp. He wore it. He had it. He loved that thing.
Yeah. That's one of the many, many reasons I adore that guy. And he jumps in. He's got great comedic timing, but he wants to always be part of the community, and anything new he's going to embrace. So that was fun last year when the Rockies had their alternate camp over at MSU, and they got a great baseball facility over there. And Ryan Strain, along with his famous dad, Joe Strain on the coaching staff, they have a good program in the RMAC baseball wise. Well,
before we get out of here, a couple other Rockies bits of news. Ian Desmond, since we last talked to you, did announce his retirement. Players coming out all around the Rockies family and on the roster, just talking about, the importance that he's had in that clubhouse and on these guys, and that, he might be gone physically right now from that locker room, but, Trevor Story, for one, is still reaching out to him, still talking with him. I imagine Charlie is doing the same now as a new father. Kind of a bittersweet ending to Desmond's reign, it seems like. He said he's going to keep an eye on things. If he's going to come back, we'll see what happens with that. But a great human being, no doubt about it, Ian Desmond.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy. The old line about walk the walk, talk the talk, right? Well, he backs things up. He's always walked the walk, and he's been that way since he arrived in the big leagues. Originally he was drafted by the Montreal Expos out of Sarasota High School. And he's always been a grown-up in the big leagues. He's been a grown-up from a leadership standpoint. Forget the production, and I know it isn't what Rockies fans had hoped when he got a 5-year deal coming off an all-star season, his 1 year down in Arlington. But those that know him and have seen his leadership, have seen how he carries himself, and the importance of family, the importance of giving back in whatever community he's been in. He's a perennial all-star in that regard. And I wish him well. And, if it is the final time he wore a Rockies uniform, now going back, well over a year, good for Ian to do it on his terms. And he did, as you said, leave the door open. So maybe, who knows, a couple months in, he comes back. We'll see what happens. Again, I know that he disappointed a lot of fans. When you sign for a big contract, there are numbers that are always going to be attached to the dollars. And, a couple of years ago, I know he hit 20 homers and stole 20 plus bases and drove in 80 something. There's a lot of players that would take those numbers, but they weren't commensurate for a lot of fans with the dollars that, he was given. And as an athlete, you're always going to battle those expectations. But from a class act standpoint, he's top shelf.
I got to talk with him down in DC in 2019, of course, longtime Nationals player. And earlier that day, he had just gone out to, again, a community that was, he wasn't necessarily a part of at that time. He's a Colorado Rockies player. We see him around here in Denver and donating to so many charities and going to the children's hospitals and things of that nature. But he still made sure that during that time, those connections that he had in DC, he was going to continue with those relationships. And that's the kind of guy he is, walking the walk. And it even goes so far with his number 20, which is, a fantastic story, is one of his first managers in big league ball, Frank Robinson, a legend there, a guy who showed him the ropes and taught him so much about integrity. And so you're right. The fans might look at how much he signed for, and, the statistics might not necessarily do him justice, but off the field in the clubhouse, I mean, the guy worth every penny he got.
Yeah, I mean, Desi's a guy that, as we were chatting about, has been about more than just how many hits he had on a given night, and we'll see what the future holds for him moving forward.
Well, speaking of futures, again, since we last talked to you, Fernando Tatis Jr. he's got his. We talk about 5 and 10 year plans. He's got a 14-year plan. Signs with the Padres an extension, $340 million. Have you put your eyes back in your head yet, Drew?
Well, here's something that's interesting about that, and I hope I get the number of games right, Patrick. I want to say he's played less than 200 major league games.
He's played less than 162. He's played less than a full season's worth.
Okay, I was saying 192. I think it's 142, isn't it?
Yeah, because he had a shortened season in 2019 as a rookie, and so that kind of ended abrupt. And then last year, so yeah, he's still under 162 at this point.
Can you imagine showing the kind of talent, we've seen it firsthand, Flash, that kind of talent that you are going to throw somebody $340 million based on less than a full season at the big league level? And I'm sure you caught this, and I'll pass it along. When you compare it to the other $300+ million guys, Mike Trout is the only $400+ million guy. He had played, I want to say, 800 or 900+ games when he was awarded, and deservedly so, his enormous contract by the Angels. The same thing goes for in Philadelphia when Bryce Harper signed his $300 million deal. Manny Machado also with the Padres. That's a remarkable thing. If you said who's going to be the first team to have two $300 million players, you would pick either the Yankees or the Dodgers on the other coast. You would not pick the team that's a couple hours south of LA in San Diego. They not only have two $300 million players, Eric Hosmer's $100+ million. Will Myers makes enough to buy dinner for everybody. They have now a significant payroll up top. So you talk about bucking a trend right now where everybody's kind of pulling in the reins financially. Owners coming off a season where they didn't have any fans, couldn't make any money from season tickets and concessions and parking. The Padres, I don't know, I guess they found a pot of gold underneath Petco Park, but they're spending money, man.
People in Southern California like wearing brown and mustard yellow, apparently.
Apparently.
It's
there's going to be a lot more people wearing brown and mustard yellow jump on that bandwagon in San Diego, and I get it.
It's wild. I mean, they're not going to be paying them a lot for the next 4 years. So again, they acquired all these guys, as you said. Hosmer's getting paid well, Machado, Will Myers, Yu Darvish. Right for the near future here, the next 4 years, Tatis Jr. is not going to get a lot of money. In fact, he'll probably be getting less than what he would have made in arbitration. So it's smart for him now, but they also lock in him for the future going ahead. And even think of it in 10 years from now. What are the best players in the game making in 10 years from now, when he still has 4 years left on his deal? You might look and go, that was a pure stroke of genius to go ahead and play it out that way.
One of the most interesting things that I saw that emanated from the signing of his contract was a piece. I want to say Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic did it, Patrick.
Yes.
And that was on this group that was this company, if you will, that basically fronts money. They gamble, and they say, well, Patrick Lyons, man, he's in AA right now. He's a kid from maybe a tougher background or whatever the situation is. Maybe he's from a fine background, but he's not making a lot of money yet. But we think Patrick Lyons is one day going to really hit it big in the big leagues. And we're going to go to him and say, hey, can we front you some money right now so, you can live in a better apartment in your AA city or your single A city, wherever you are. Maybe you buy a nice car. Maybe you take care of mom and dad and help them out a little bit. And they started this company, and one of the guys they bet on was Fernando Tatis Jr., and they paid him, fronted him, if you will, money. Well, on the backside, they're going to get a negotiated piece of that future salary. Well, in this case, their gamble paid off because he's going to make $340 million, and he's going to pay whatever he got. He's going to pay back exponentially, and he is quoted as saying, "I'm happy to do it. It worked out well for me at the time, going back to his minor league days, and it's certainly he's going to be able to cover it now with the contract he just signed." But I thought that was fascinating. I had not heard of a company doing that prior to reading that piece. Again, I believe it was by Ken Rosenthal.
Yeah, it was. Big League Advance is the name of the company, with former Phillies pitcher Michael Schwimmer. And I'd heard about them about 4 or 5 years ago, and then it seemed like all of a sudden I couldn't get any information about this company. I think a lot of that was by design. Partially the Players Association haven't really given the thumbs up on this company because it could impact their players negatively in contract negotiations going forward. And I also think the company is probably like, yeah, you know what? People might not like the idea that we're giving a player maybe even just $100,000, which is a lot of money to a lot of people. But to these players, that $100,000 investment, by getting 2% of what their future earnings are going to be, they're going to easily make $1 million, $2 million off of that small investment. And it's one of the reasons why they've got just under 200 players that they've done this with. And yeah, what about the taxes in California too? I mean, how much money is this? We shouldn't be crying for Tatis Jr. He's still going to be well paid, even if a lot of his wages are going to be garnished going forward.
Yeah, again, he'll still be able to buy groceries. He'll probably have a nice ride or 3 or 5 that he can utilize, and his crib will be better than your crib.
Can't argue with that. Check out the Drew Creasman podcast. It did drop today, Thursday morning. Steve Foster, great scouting report on the pitchers in Rockies camp right now.
So you're so used to doing your show with your buddy Drew that you call it the Drew Creasman podcast. Oh. And you know what? He has a podcast every single day. I can only do one a week. I mean, I don't know how you guys pull it off every day. So I'm only doing one a week.
Drew Goodman podcast. Look at that. At least I didn't say Drew Butera podcast. I did not do that.
Hey, is Drew in camp with somebody? I think he is.
I'm going to say Texas. It's hard to keep track of everybody. Right. I want to say because I thought, all right, Dahl and Butera getting back together. So he's not hanging it up. I mean, I'm sure he's got a spot as a coach with somebody when he decides to call it a career. But I think he's down in Texas.
Patrick, the analogy there, my friend, is the guy that hangs in the league in the NFL as a backup quarterback because he's good and he's solid, good teammate, and if you have to put him in the game, he can manage the game, and he plays like 17 years and 15 and a half of them he's wearing a baseball cap, and he makes a really good living. Well, in baseball, the equivalent is the backup catcher who's really good handling a pitching staff and is going to give you, twice a week. You can throw him out there and he's going to be okay. And maybe he'll throw out a hit once in a while. That's Drew Butera. He's going to have a nice big league career. He's never going to make a ton of money, but he's going to play a lot longer than guys, at other positions that maybe had better talent because he has the ability to catch.
Yeah, baseball lifer, and it seems that's going to be the way it goes for him. And his father, Sal Butera. So we wish Drew Butera nothing but luck. We miss Drew Creasman. We'll get him back tomorrow on Friday's pod. And thank you, Drew Goodman, host of the Drew Goodman podcast. Make sure you download that. We'll see you tomorrow, 4:05. We're going to be live again on YouTube. Make sure to like, share, subscribe. If you're listening to this on iTunes, make sure to leave us a nice little review and subscribe if you aren't already. I'm Patrick D. Lyons. This is my guy, Drew Goodman, at Drew Goodman 42. Follow him on Twitter. And we'll stay Patrick and Drew, and we'll see you at the ballpark.